So in my presentation, I will show what can actually be done through satellite technologies and some practical examples that we have developed thanks to the cooperation with ADB facilitated by the European Space Agency. I'm Domenico Grandoni. I come from e-GEOS, which is an Italian firm belonging to the Finmeccanica Industrial Group and is a joint venture with the Italian Space Agency. We are based in Rome. We have also our premises in south of Italy, in Matera, and for us, the geoinformation business, that is the business related to satellites and geoinformation, is roughly something around 100 billion euros per year. We have a wide geographical footprint, both in Europe and in South and Latin America. So, in the framework of the cooperation with ADB, so we target the problem of the scarce availability of quality and reliable transport infrastructure datasets in the Asia-Pacific. And we tested the feasibility of using satellite technologies in order to build sound, robust methodologies that can be then widespread in order to standardize the collection of such data in an effective way. And actually, stated the problem, here are some first considerations about the reasons why to use satellite Earth observations. You can check here some of the advantages, which is of the expected advantages, which is related to cost effectiveness, to the frequency of update, to the comparability of results, the objectivity of data collection, scalability to wide areas, because this is the normal problem when you have to collect such kind of data, that normally you don't want to have them just on a small sample, but you want to have them countrywide. The easiness to share and distribute results, data continuity, because of course you don't want to get such transportation infrastructure data only now, but you want to have them and updated them in the future. And of course, validation and reliability of this data. In the next slide, I have more details about the advantages. I will not go into the detail now since there is not much time, but since this material will be made available to you, you can then get more details about them. But this is just to set the stage and to understand why we are intending to use satellite remote sensing Earth observation for this kind of problem. And so in order to answer the problem, we defined a set of different products targeting different aspects of transportation data. So the first product that we defined together with the European Space Agency and ADB is transport infrastructure inventory and change. So essentially, this product targets to make an inventory and change over time of all transport infrastructure that can be detected over a satellite image. In this case, we need to find a threshold between the level of detail of the information that we gather and the scalability to wide areas that we can achieve. So in this case, we define a product that can be scaled to country level. So here are some information about accuracy, and what you can get over this map is actually the inventory of all linear infrastructure, both belonging to roads, railroads, and so on, and their associated elements. And of course, they change over time. So here we are in Baku in Azerbaijan, and we see in green and red the elements that have changed in the period from 2002 to 2010. The second product that was found of interest is population density. So here the problem is how to get a reliable information about population density within the radius of 1 kilometer centered on a station. We are still in Baku. And how to transform aggregated population data, for instance at municipality level, down to population data aggregated at single building block level. The third product is detailed land use mapping, because it's clear that within, for instance, a corridor of 250, 500, or 800 meters, depending on the case, from a certain transportation line, it is very important to know which is the detailed land use at single building level. So identifying which are the different buildings, their usage, the transportation network, the presence, for instance, of green elements, and so on. And this can be used in both in the phase of feasibility analysis and then detailed design of a new transport infrastructure. And the last product that we are testing is how to derive maritime traffic statistics from satellite data. So how to correlate traditional information, for instance, from AIS with observed traffic shifts from satellite data. So this is a slide about the ancillary data that we use. This is just for your records, and if you're curious, you can get more details about the different ancillary data sources. While for satellite data sources, we use a different set of satellite data, because you can imagine that there are satellites with different resolution, but also with different coverages. So the main concept here is that if you want to get the best resolution, you have limitation in the coverage. So for instance, 0.5 meter resolution acquires strips of 16 kilometers every time, while for instance, 1.5 meter resolution, which is a lower level of detail, can acquire wider area at a single time. So what does this mean? It means that we have to use the right resolution for the right level of detail that we want to achieve and the coverage that we expect. So in simple words, it means that we have to use the right instrument for our purposes in order also to keep the service sustainable in terms of costs. About cost, cost is a function of three main elements, which is the product type, so the 4 different products that we see. Of course, they are different in terms of complexity and level of detail, and so they have a different influence on cost. Of course, on the level of detail, for instance, in terms of minimum mapping unit, so which is the size of the smallest element that we are going to detect from the satellite image, and also in terms of area of interest. Of course, the size, how large it is, and complexity, how complex the area is. Okay, from these datasets, you can derive, of course, classic transport indicators, and this is good because essentially this is an alternative way to get the data that you are used to have to derive the indicators that you normally want to derive when you are doing transportation planning. And these are the areas where we have been testing these products. So I will then show some local example from the different areas of interest. So for instance, in this case, we are in Peshawar, in Pakistan, and this is the product that we derive, which is the transport infrastructure inventory and change. So just focusing, so this is the T0, and this is the change map where we highlight the different elements that have changed in the transportation network. So this is just a closer look to the change detection sequence. So this is the T0 in the early 2000s, and this is the transportation network at that time. This is the update satellite image in around 2010. This is the updated transport network. And this is the change detection. Essentially, the elements that have changed, so we see that there is a new motorway, together with, of course, the updated view of the transport network. So this is something that can be achieved through standard methodologies. And so the data collection essentially is based on the visual analysis of the satellite data together with ancillary data. So the relevant thing here is that there is no need for in-field survey. And so the point is that if you have resources for in-field survey, you can use them in a more efficient way in order to get additional information that cannot be derived from satellite or from ancillary data. Again, in Baku, we have been working on an area of interest of roughly 1,000 square kilometers that was comprising both the Baku city area and its surroundings on 2 different reference periods. So the T1 in this case was 2014. We derived, as we saw before, transport infrastructure inventory and change, but as well population estimation around the stations of a possible new railroad system. And so this is the kind of information that we derived, both in terms of the number of inhabitants and of density within the radius of 1 kilometer centered in each station. So in this case, the added value is, as I said before, the finer disaggregation level of population data that were available from census data for Baku, but not at this level of detail. They were aggregated over the whole city. And this is an example of one station with the higher level of detailed representation of population data. This is an example of land use mapping. So this is the kind of land use that you can expect, both distinguishing in terms of from residential up to industrial, commercial, and religious use, the presence of green areas, and of course the transport network elements. So these are the classes that we were able to distinguish. And this is an example of another area, both with aggregation of building blocks for residential and the disaggregation of single building footprints for all uses different from residential. And this is just a view with the single building footprints. Here we are in Fiji, and in this case we delivered only the product for transport infrastructure, inventory, and change. And again, this is the situation in the early 2000. This is the update around 2010. And these are the elements that have changed in the transport infrastructure network. Of course, this kind of update can be delivered regularly over time, also for the future, since there is good data continuity from satellites ensured from ongoing satellite missions. And the last case in Micronesia. So just to conclude, from our perspective, the potential use of satellite services within ADB is both for strategic planning, since here we have tools, technology, and methodologies for delivering continuous data and updated data about the overall picture of transport infrastructure network at country level. So we adopted a level of detail that can be generalized and that can be extended to a country level in order to deliver homogeneous statistics and homogeneous data also across country. But of course, if we use higher level of detailed products, like for instance population estimation and detailed land use products, then we are also in the domain of the feasibility study and design for new projects, because in this case these elements are important also to sustain this phase. Another side aspect is that this kind of data can be used also for asset mapping, which is something that is a little bit far from transportation, but that has also some impact, for instance, on disaster risk reduction policies and on disaster risk reduction actions, because a key aspect there is to know where your assets are. And in this case, transportation, both for the road network, the rail network, and all the other elements, are key figures for those who are dealing with disaster risk reduction, and of course also for contingency planning. So this kind of data set, even if it's born within the transportation unit and for transportation planning purposes, then it can be easily spread also to other divisions and to other, let's say, elements. And in just really 3 bullets, which is the value of satellite Earth observation against traditional methods to collect such data. Well, the first thing is objectivity. Essentially, you are gathering objective data that are not biased by the collection method and, for instance, for the specific operator. The cost effectiveness, since essentially in this case there are economies of scale, especially for wide areas, since the cost of satellite data, if we use the right satellite data, and so if we are not using a higher resolution satellite data for mapping things that can be extracted with lower resolution and cheaper data, then is real. And last, that is related to objectivity, is the comparability of results. So the data that we extract and that we derive and we deliver are absolutely comparable and allow, for instance, cross-country and multi-temporal results comparability and analysis for future trends. Thanks.